Hi, everybody. This is Anjanette from AJ's Personal Touch. How you doing today? I have to tell you, this is my third time trying to tape this, so let's see how this goes. Um, Today is Saturday. It's about a quarter till 4, and we are about to read Anna Karenina. Um, I do want to apologize for being behind. I'm trying to catch up with my readings, but I am also trying to get my bookmarks, not my bookmarks. See, another mess up. My stitch markers done in time to put them up for sale for the date that I have set that I want to be my grand opening. And I have a lot to get done. So I do apologize for that. And of course, I had my procedure last week for my pain block, which puts me into acute pancreatitis at first. But it's worth it doing that because then afterwards, the relief that I get for the time that I get it is worth it to have the week to 2 weeks of excruciating pain. I'm always in pain, but that pain is excruciating. Um, so I've been dealing with that, and I could not get on and read this week more than the little bit I did the other day. So I do apologize for that, but I am just doing what my health is allowing me to do. I had a complete sleep day yesterday. My body finally said, no more working, anything, you're sleeping. And I woke up last night and I did get some crocheting done, but nothing at all on stitch markers. So today I have to make up for that. And I did sleep later today than I had planned on till like 3 because again, my body is saying you need your sleep, you need your rest. And when it's telling me that, I need to listen because otherwise all I do is make myself so bad that I end up getting sick and then I'm down for weeks. And I cannot afford to do that right now. So all that said, I was not going to tell you, let all this stuff rush out and tell you guys, but I do. It's me. You guys know when you come on here, you get me, and that's who I am. Yes, I end up telling you because I have people asking how I'm doing, so I'd rather just tell you than, not tell you. I know some people leave that stuff for the end, so people who want just the yarny stuff or book readings can see that first. Um, yeah, I don't think of that. I just think, whatever. My channel. I tell you guys about me, and I hope, I do know that followers I have really enjoy coming here, or at least that's what they tell me. And I try to make it enjoyable for all of you as best as I can. And I do try not to tell you everything. Um, Certain things you guys don't need to know, they're too personal. Come with my illness and things. But anyway, with that said, let's get to reading and just stop talking about all that gobbledygook for now. Because we ended at a very good spot in this book. I, for one, want to see what's going to happen. Book 2, Part 2. I keep calling it Book 2, Part 2, Chapter 8. I think I'm doing Alexei Alexandrovich had seen nothing striking or improper in the fact that his wife was sitting with Vronsky at a table apart, in eager conversation with him about something. But he noticed that the rest of the party disappeared something striking and improper. He noticed that to the rest of the party this appeared something striking and improper, and for that reason it seemed to him too to be improper. He made up his mind that he must speak of it to his wife. On reaching home, Alexey Alexandrovitch went to his study as he usually did, seated himself in his low chair, opened a book on the papacy at the place where he had laid the paper knife in it, and read till 1 o'clock, just as he usually did. But from time to time he rubbed his high forehead and shook his head, as though to drive away something. At his usual time he got up and made his toilette for the night. Anna Arkadyevna had not yet come in. With the book under his arm he went upstairs. But this evening, instead of the usual thoughts and meditations upon official details, His thoughts were absorbed by his wife and something disagreeable connected with her. Contrary to his usual habit, he did not get into bed, but fell to walking up and down the rooms with his hands clasped behind his back. He could not go to bed, feeling that it was absolutely needful for him to first think thoroughly over the position that had just arisen. When Alexey Alexandrovitch had made up his mind that he must talk to his wife about it, it had seemed a very easy and simple matter. But now, when he began to think over the question that he had just presented itself, it seemed to him very complicated and difficult. Alexey Alexandrovitch was not jealous. Jealousy, according to his notions, was an insult to one's wife, and one ought to have confidence in one's wife. Why, one ought to have confidence, that is to say, complete conviction that his young wife would always love him. He did not ask himself, but he had had no experience of lack of confidence, because he had confidence in her, and told himself that he ought to have it. Now, though, his conviction that jealousy was a shameful feeling and that one ought to feel confidence had not broken down. He felt that he was standing face to face with something illogical and irrational, and did not know what was to be done. Alexey Alexandrovitch was standing face to face with life, with the possibility of his wife's loving someone other than himself, and this seemed to him very irrational and incomprehensible, because it was life itself. All his life Alexey Alexandrovitch had lived and worked in official spheres, having to do with the reflection of life. And every time he had stumbled against life itself, he had shrunk away from it. Now he experienced a feeling akin to that of a man who, while calmly crossing a precipice by a bridge, should suddenly discover that the bridge is broken and that there is a chasm below. That chasm was life itself. The bridge, that artificial life in which Alexey Alexandrovitch had lived. For the first time, the question presented itself to him of the possibility of his wife's loving someone else, and he was horrified at it. He did not undress, but walked up and down with his regular tread over the resounding parquet of the dining room, where one lamp was burning, over the carpet of the dark drawing room, in which the light was reflected on the big new portrait of himself hanging over the sofa, and across her boudoir where two candles burned, lighting up the portraits of her parents and women friends, and the pretty knickknacks of her writing table that he knew so well. He walked across her boudoir to the bedroom door, and turned back again. At each turn in his walk, especially at the parquet of the lighted dining room, he halted and said to himself, "Yes, this I must decide and put a stop to. I must express my view of it and my decision." And he turned back again. But express what? What decision? He said to himself in the drawing room, and he found no reply. But after all, he asked himself, before turning into the boudoir, what has occurred? Nothing. She was talking a long while with him, but what of that? Surely women in society can talk to whom they please. And then jealousy means lowering both myself and her. He told himself as he went into her boudoir, but this dictum, which had always had such weight with him before, had now no weight, and no meaning at all. And from the bedroom door he turned back again. But as he entered the dark drawing room, some inner voice told him that it was not so, and that if others noticed it, that showed that there was something. And he said to himself again in the dining room, "Yes, I must decide and put a stop to it, and express my view of it." And again, at the turn in the drawing room, he asked himself, "Decide how?" And again he asked himself what had occurred, and answered, "Nothing," and recollected that jealousy was a feeling insulting to his wife. But again in the drawing room he was convinced that something had happened. His thoughts, like his body, went round a complete circle without coming upon anything new. He noticed this, rubbed his forehead, and sat down in his boudoir. There, looking at her table with the malachite blotting case lying at the top, and an unfinished letter, his thoughts suddenly changed. He began to think of her, of what she was thinking and feeling. For the first time, he pictured vividly to himself her personal life, her ideas, her desires, and the idea that she could and should have a separate life of her own seemed to him so alarming that he made haste to dispel it. It was the chasm which he was afraid to peep into, to put himself in thought and feeling in another person's place with a spiritual exercise not natural to Alexey Alexandrovitch. He looked on this spiritual exercise as a harmful and dangerous abuse of the fancy. And the worst of it all, thought he, is that just now, at this very moment, when my great work is approaching completion, he was thinking of the project he was bringing forward at the time, when I stand in need of all my mental peace and all my energies. Just now, this stupid worry should fall foul of me. But what's to be done? I'm not one of those men who submit to uneasiness and worry without having the force of character to face them. I must think it over, come to a decision, and put it out of my mind, he said aloud. The question of her feelings, of what has passed and may be passing in her soul, that's not my affair. That's the affair of her conscience, and falls under the head of religion, he said to himself, feeling consolation in the sense that he had found to which division of regulating principles this new circumstance could be properly referred. And so, Alexey Alexandrovitch said to himself, questions as to her feelings and so on are questions for her conscience, with which I can have nothing to do. My duty is clearly defined. As the head of the family, I am a person bound in duty to guide her, and consequently, in part, the person responsible. I am bound to point out the danger I perceive, to warn her, even to use my authority. I ought to speak plainly to her, and everything that he would say tonight to his wife took clear shape in Alexey Alexandrovich's head. Thinking over what he would say, he somewhat regretted that he should have to use his time and mental powers for domestic consumption. So little to show for it. But in spite of that, the form and contents of the speech before him shaped itself as clearly and distinctly in his head as a ministerial report. I must say and express fully the following points. First, exposition of the value to be attached to public opinion and to decorum. Secondly, exposition of religious significance of marriage. Thirdly, if need be, reference to the calamity possibly ensuing to our son. Fourthly, reference to the unhappiness likely to result to herself. And interlacing his fingers, Alexey Alexandrovitch stretched them, and the joints of the fingers cracked. This trick, a bad habit, the cracking of his fingers, always soothed him and gave precision to his thoughts, so needful to him at this juncture. There was the sound of a carriage driving up to the front door. Alexey Alexandrovitch halted in the middle of the room. A woman's step was heard mounting the stairs. Alexey Alexandrovitch, ready for his speech, stood compressing his crossed fingers, waiting to see if the crack would not come again. One joint cracked. Already, from the sound of light steps on the stairs, he was aware that she was close, and though he was satisfied with his speech, he felt frightened of the explanation confronting him. Chapter 9. Guys, as excited as I am in this book, wow. Anna came in with hanging head, playing with the tassels of her hood. Her face was brilliant and glowing, but this glow was not one of brightness. It suggested the fearful glow of a conflagration in the midst of the dark night. On seeing her husband, Anna raised her head and smiled, as though she had just waked up. "You're not in bed? What a wonder," she said, letting fall her hood. And without stopping, she went into the dressing room. "It's late, Alexey Alexandrovitch," she said. She had gone through the doorway. "Anna, it's necessary for me to have a talk with you." "With me?" she said wonderingly. She came out from behind the door of the dressing room. and looked at him. Why, what is it? What about? She asked, sitting down. Well, let's talk, if it's so necessary, but it would be better to get to sleep. Anna said what came to her lips and marveled, hearing herself at her own capacity for lying. How simple and natural were her words, and how likely that she was simply sleepy. She felt herself clad in an impenetrable armor of falsehood. She felt that some unforeseen force had come to her and was supporting her. Anna, I must warn you, he began. Warn me, she said. Of what? She looked at him so simply, so brightly, that anyone who did not know her as her husband knew her could not have noticed anything unnatural, either in the sound or the sense of her words. But to him, knowing her, knowing that whenever he went to bed 5 minutes later than usual, she noticed it and asked him the reason. To him, knowing that every joy, every pleasure and pain that she felt, she communicated to him at once. To him, now to see that she did not care to notice his state of mind, that she did not care to say a word about herself, meant a great deal. He saw that the inmost recesses of her soul that had always hitherto lain open before him were closed against him. More than that, he saw from her tone that she was not even perturbed at that, but as it were said straight out to him. Yes, it's shut up, and so it must be, and will be in future. Now he experienced a feeling such as a man might have, returning home and finding his own house locked up. But perhaps the key may yet be found, thought Alexey Alexandrovitch. I want to warn you, he said in a low voice, that though thoughtlessness and lack of caution you may cause yourself to be talked about in society, your too an- your too animated conversation this evening with Count Vronsky, he enunciated the name firmly and with deliberate emphasis, attracted attention. He talked and looked at her laughing eyes, which frightened him now with their impenetrable look. As he talked, he felt all the uselessness and idleness of his words. You're always like that, she answered, as though completely misapprehending him, and of all he had said only taking in the last phrase. One time you don't like my being dull, and another time you don't like my being lively. I wasn't dull. Does this offend you? Alexey Alexandrovitch shivered and bent his hands to make the joints crack. Oh, please don't do that. I do so dislike it, she said. Anna, is this you? Said Alexey Alexandrovitch quietly, making an effort over himself and restraining the motion of his fingers. But what is it all about? She said, with such genuine and droll wonder. What do you want of me? Alexey Alexandrovitch paused and rubbed his forehead and his eyes. He saw that instead of doing as he had intended, this is to say, warning his wife against a mistake in the eyes of the world, he had unconsciously become agitated over what was the affair of her conscience, and was struggling against the barrier he fancied between them. This is what I meant to say to you, he went on coldly and composedly, and I beg you to listen to it. I consider jealousy, as you know, a humiliating and degrading feeling, and I shall never allow myself to be influenced by it. But there are certain rules of decorum which cannot be disregarded with impunity. This evening it was not, I observed it, but judging by the impression made on the company, everyone observed that your conduct and deportment were not altogether what could be desired. I previously don't understand, said Anna, shrugging her shoulders. Or I positively don't understand, said Anna, shrugging her shoulders. He doesn't care, she thought, but other people noticed it, and that's what upsets him. You're not well, Alexey Alexandrovitch, she added, and she got up and would have gone towards the door, but he moved forward as though he would stop her. His face was ugly and forbidding, and Anna had never seen him. She stopped as Anna had never seen him. She stopped and, bending her head back on one side, began with her rapid hand taking out her hairpins. Well, I'm listening to what's to come, she said calmly and ironically, and indeed I listen with interest, for I should like to understand what's the matter. spoke and marveled at the confident, calm, and natural tone in which she was speaking, and the choice of the words she used. To enter into all the details of your feelings, I have no right. And besides, I regard that as useless and even harmful, began Alexey Alexandrovitch. Ferreting in one's soul, one often ferrets out something that might have lain there unnoticed. Your feelings are an affair of your own conscience, but I am in duty bound to you, to myself, and to God, to point out that your duties, our life has been joined not by man, but by God. That union can only be severed by a crime, and a crime of that nature brings its own chastisement. I don't understand a word, and oh dear, how sleepy I am, unluckily, she said, rapidly passing her hand through her hair, feeling for the remaining hairpins. Anna, for God's sake, don't speak like that, he said gently. Perhaps I am mistaken, but believe me what I say. I say as much for myself as for you. I am your husband, and I love you. For an instant her face fell, and the mocking gleam in her eyes died away. But the word love threw her into revolt again. She thought, love? Can he love? If he hadn't heard there was such a thing as love, he would never have used the word. He doesn't even know what love is. Alexey Alexandrovitch, really, I don't understand, she said. Define what it is you find. Pardon, let me say all I have to say. I love you, but I am not speaking of myself. The most important person in this matter are our son and yourself. It may very well be, I repeat, that my words seem to you utterly unnecessary and out of place. It may be that they are called forth by my mistaken impression. In that case, I beg you to forgive me. But if you are conscious yourself of even the smallest foundation for them, then I beg you to think a little, and if your heart prompts you to speak out to me. Alexey Alexandrovitch was unconsciously saying something utterly unlike what he had prepared. I have nothing to say, and besides, she said hurriedly, with difficulty repressing a smile, it's really time to be in bed. Alexey Alexandrovitch sighed, and without saying more, went into the bedroom. When she came into the bedroom, he was already in bed. His lips were sternly compressed, and his eyes looked away from her. Anna got into her bed and lay expecting every minute that he would begin to speak to her again. She both feared his speaking and wished for it. He was silent. She waited for a long while without moving, and had forgotten about him. She thought of the other. She pictured him, and felt how her heart was flooded with emotion and guilty delight at the thought of him. Suddenly she heard an even, tranquil snore. For the first instant, Alexey Alexandrovitch seemed, as it were, appalled at his own snoring, and ceased. But after an interval of two breathings, the snore sounded again with a new tranquil rhythm. It's late, it's late, she whispered with a smile. A long while she lay not moving, with open eyes, whose brilliance she almost fancied she could herself see in the darkness. Chapter 10. From that time a new life began for Alexey Alexandrovitch and for his wife. Nothing special happened. Anna went out into society as she had always done, was particularly often at Princess Betsy's, and met Vronsky everywhere. Alexey Alexandrovitch saw this, but could do nothing. All his efforts to draw her into open discussion he confronted with a barrier which he could not penetrate, made up of sort of amused perplexity. Outwardly, everything was the same, but their inner relations were completely changed. Alexey Alexandrovitch, a man of great power in the world of politics, felt himself helpless in this. Like an ox with head bent, submissively he waited the blow which he felt was lifted over him. Every time he began to think about it, he felt that he must try once more, that by kindness, tenderness, and persuasion there was still hope of saving her, of bringing her back to herself, and every day he made ready to talk to her, but every time he began talking to her, he felt that the spirit of evil and deceit, which had taken possession of her, had possession of him too, and he talked to her in a tone quite unlike that in which he had meant to talk. Involuntarily, he talked to her in his habitual tone of jeering at anyone who should say what he was saying. And in that tone, it was impossible to say what needed to be said to her. Okay, that was the end of chapter 10. It was a very short chapter, only half an hour in. Starting something new, it looks like. I'll go ahead and try and do a couple more chapters. Chapter 11. That which for Vronsky had almost been a whole year, the one absorbing desire for his life, replacing all his old desires, that which for Anna had been an impossible, terrible, and even for that reason more entrancing dream of bliss, that desire had been fulfilled. He stood before her, pale, his lower jaw quivering, and besought her to be calm and knowing how or why. Anna, Anna, he said with a choking voice. Anna, for pity's sake. But the louder he spoke, the lower she dropped her once proud and gay, now shame-stricken head, and she bowed down and sank from the sofa where she was sitting down on the floor at his feet. She would have fallen on the carpet if he had not held her. My God, forgive me, she said, sobbing, pressing his hands to her bosom. She felt so sinful, so guilty, that nothing was left but to humiliate herself and beg forgiveness. And as now there was no one in her life but him, to him she addressed her prayer for forgiveness. Looking at him, she had a physical sense of her humiliation, and she could say nothing more. He felt what a murderer must feel when he sees the body he has robbed of life. That body, robbed by him of life, was their love, the first stage of their love. There was something awful and revolting in the memory of what had been bought at this fearful price of shame. Shame at their spiritual nakedness crushed her and infected him. But in spite of all the murderer's horror before the body of his victim, he must hack it to pieces, hide the body, must use what he has gained by his murder. And with fury, as it were with passion, the murderer falls on the body and drags it and hacks at it. So he covered her face and shoulders with kisses. She held his hand and did not stir. Yes, these kisses, that is what has been bought by this shame. Yes, and one hand, which will always be mine, the hand of my accomplice. She lifted up that hand and kissed it. He sank on his knees and tried to see her face, but she hid it and said nothing. At last, as though making an effort over herself, she got up and pushed him away. Her face was still as beautiful, but it was only the more pitiful for that. All is over, she said. I have nothing but you, remember that. I can never forget what is my whole life for one instant of this happiness. Happiness, she said with horror and loathing, and horror confusingly infected him. For pity's sake, not a word, not a word more. She rose quickly and moved away from him. Not a word more, she repeated, and with a look of chill despair, incomprehensible to him, she parted for him. She felt that at that moment she could not put into words the sense of shame, of rapture, and of horror at this stepping into a new life, and she did not want to speak of it, to vulgarize this feeling by inappropriate words. But later, too, and the next day, and the third day, she still found no words in which she could express the complexity of her feelings. Indeed, she could not even find thoughts in which she could clearly think out at all that was in her soul. She said to herself, no, just now I can't think of it. Later on, when I am calmer. But this calm for thought never came. Every time the thought rose of what she had done and what would happen to her and what she ought to do, a horror came over her and she drove those thoughts away. Later, later, she said, when I am calmer. But in dreams, when she had no control over her thoughts, her position presented itself to her as all its hideous nakedness. One dream haunted her almost every night. She dreamed that both were her husband at once, and that both were lavishing caresses on her. Alexey Alexandrovitch was weeping, kissing her hands, and saying, "How happy we are now." And Alexey Vronsky was there too, and he too was her husband, and she was marveling that it had once seemed impossible to her, was explaining to them, laughing, that this was ever so much simpler, and that now both of them were happy and contented. But this dream weighed on her like a nightmare, and she awoke from it in terror. Chapter 12. In the early days after his return from Moscow, whenever Levin shuddered and grew red, remembering the disgrace of his rejection, he said to himself, "This was just how I used to shudder and blush, thinking myself utterly lost, when I was plucked in physics and did not get my remove, and how I thought myself utterly ruined after I had mismatched that affair of my sister's that was entrusted to me. And yet, now that years have passed, I recall it and wonder that it could distress me so much. It will be the same thing, too, with this trouble. Time will go by, and I shall not mind about that either." But 3 months had passed, and he had not left off minding about it, and it was as painful for him to think of it as it had been those first days. He could not be at peace because, after dreaming so long of family life and feeling himself so ripe for it, he was still not married, and was further than ever from marriage. He was painfully conscious himself, as were all about him, that at his years it is not well for man to be alone. He remembered how, before starting for Moscow, he had once said to his cowman, Nikolay, a simple-hearted peasant whom he liked talking to, "Well, Nikolay, I mean to get married." And how Nikolay had promptly answered, as of a matter on which there could be no impossible doubt, "And high time too, Konstantin Dmitrovitch." But marriage had now become farther off than ever. The place were taken, and whenever the place was taken, and whenever he tried to imagine any of the girls he knew in that place, he felt that it was utterly impossible. Moreover, the recollection of the rejection and the part he had played in the affair tortured him with shame. However often he told himself that he was in no way to blame in it, that recollection, like other humiliating reminiscences of a similar kind, made him twinge and blush. There had been in his past, as in every man's actions recognized by him as bad, for which his conscience ought to have tormented him. But the memory of those evil actions was far from causing him so much suffering as though trivial but humiliating reminiscences. These wounds never healed, and with these memories was now ranged his rejection, and the pitiful position in which he must have appeared to others that evening. But time and work did their part. Bitter memories were more and more covered up by the incidents, paltry in his eyes, but really important, of his country life. Every week he thought less often of Kitty. He was impatiently looking forward to the news that she was married, or just going to be married, hoping that such news would, like having a tooth out, completely cure him. Meanwhile, spring came on, beautiful and kindly, without the delays and treacheries of spring, one with those rare springs in which plants, beasts, and man rejoice alike. This loving spring roused Levin still more, and strengthened him in his resolution of renouncing all his past and building up his lonely life firmly and independently. Though many of the plans with which he had returned to the country had not been carried out, still his most important resolution, that of purity, had been kept by him. He was free from that shame which had usually harassed him after a fall, and he could look everyone straight in the face. In February he had received a letter from Marya Nikolaevna telling him that his brother Nikolay's health was getting worse, but that he would not take advice, and in consequence of this letter Levin went to Moscow to his brother's, and succeeded in persuading him to see a doctor and to go to a watering place abroad. He succeeded so well in persuading his brother and in lending him money for the journey without irritating him, that he was satisfied with himself in that matter. In addition to his farming, which called for special attention in spring, and in addition to reading, Levin had begun that winter a work on agriculture, the plan of which turned on taking into account the character of the laborer on the land as one of the unalterable data of the question, like the climate and the soil, and consequently deducing all the principles of scientific culture, not simply from the data of soil and climate, but from the data of soil, climate, and a certain unalterable character of the laborer. Thus, in spite of his solitude, or in consequence of his solitude, his life was exceedingly full. Only rarely he suffered from an unsatisfied desire to communicate his stray ideas to someone besides Agafia Mikhailovna. With her, indeed, he did not infrequently fell into discussions upon physics, the theory of agriculture, and especially philosophy. Philosophy was Agafia Mikhailovna's favorite subject. Spring was slow in unfolding. For the last few weeks it had been steadily fine, frosty weather. In the daytime it thawed in the sun, but at night there were even 7 degrees of frost. There was such a frozen surface on the snow that they drove the wagons everywhere off the roads. Easter came in the snow. Then all of a sudden on Easter Monday a warm wind sprang up. Storm clouds swooped down, and for 3 days and 3 nights the warm, driving rain fell in streams. On Thursday the wind dropped, and the thick gray fog brooded over the land as though hiding the mysteries of the transformations that were being wrought in nature. Behind the fog there was the flowing of water, the cracking and floating of ice, the swift rush of turbid, foaming torrents, and on the following Monday, in the evening, the fog parted, the storm clouds split up into little curling crests of cloud, the sky cleared, and the real spring had come. In the morning the sun rose brilliant and quickly wore away the thin layer of ice that covered the water, and all the warm air was quivering with the stream that rose up from quickened earth. The old grass looked greener, and the younger grass thrust up its tiny blades. The buds of the guelder rose and of the currant and sticky birch buds were swollen with sap, and an exploring bee was humming about the golden blossoms that studded the willow. Excuse me. Larks trilled unseen above the velvety green fields and the ice-covered stubble-land. Peewits wailed over the lowlands and marshes, flooded by the pools. Cranes and wild geese flew high across the sky, uttering their spring calls. The cattle, bald in patches where the new hair had not grown yet, lowed in the pastures. The bow-legged lambs frisked round their bleating mothers. Nimble children ran about the drying paths, covered with the prints of bare feet. There was a merry chatter of peasant women over their linen at the pond, and the ring of axes in the yard where the peasants were repairing plows and harrows. The real spring had come. Okay, and I am going to stop there. The next chapter will be chapter 13. I know it's only 38 minutes, but my throat's getting dry and it's a perfect pause in the book. So if you are watching this, tell me below, what do you think? What do you think has Anna so upset? Do you think they've actually gone past just knowing that they have an attraction? I'm interested to see what's going to happen. And don't worry, I'm not going to ask a lot of questions when I'm reading it because I want you guys to think your own, thoughts together. If at any time you would ever want to stop and discuss the book, um, I would love to have somebody to discuss the book with. but I know as of right now, only one person is following along. Um, Others will follow along later. But I always thought that would be cool, like to read a couple chapters and have some kind of a um, book to get together, have people have their book clubs and stuff. Anyway, I just thought that would be cool to do. Kind of hard to go back and talk about it once you've, gone forward and you're reading ahead and others are so far behind you. I'm just curious as to what you think. So with that, I am going to go. I have lots to do today. So always remember you matter. And if you ever need anything, just message me and I will get back to you. You can message me on Facebook, on you can leave a comment below for YouTube. You can message me on Instagram, or you can email me, and all of that is written down below. So I will see you all later. Remember, you are beautiful. You are so beautiful, gorgeous, handsome, and don't let anybody ever tell you otherwise. Now, I will talk to you later. See ya.